Hi, I'm Eddie Moretti. Welcome to the Vice podcast. I'm sitting here with Ben Anderson. Hi, Ben.
How you doing?
Let's talk about the documentary that you just produced for Vice. Well, it wasn't. It was the continuation of a documentary that you had already done in a much shorter form for the BBC. It's called "This Is What Winning Looks Like," and it's you going to Afghanistan. And so, tell us the origin of this documentary. I know you've been there for many years.
I've been travelling to Helmand, where the war is fiercest for the last 6 years, and one town in particular called Sangin is where more British soldiers lost their lives than anywhere else. So it's famous in Britain. It's just been handed over pretty much to the Afghan army and police. So I wanted to go and see what that looked like. And I had a pretty good idea what it would look like because I've seen the Afghan army and police in action in the past. But it was even worse than I thought.
So you went in embedded, or how did you get your access?
I through the Marines, but then I went out with the Afghan police and army from there. But you can't really go out with the Afghan army and police anymore. You have to stay with the US Marines all the time, and they live completely separately. So I could only go out for a day at a time because of the insider attacks. They're completely separate, and whenever the US Marines go onto the Afghan side of the base or go to an Afghan base, they cock their weapons just in case there's insider attack.
Right. So go through just like the laundry list of stuff that you found while you were there.
Without exaggeration, I found evidence that the police were kidnapping civilians for money or as part of a prisoner exchange, murdering people. There were a number of drug addicts among them. A number of them didn't even exist. They were just names on a payroll for extra income. They were abducting and raping young children and sometimes
like young boys.
Yeah, and sometimes murdering them when they tried to escape. So, even with my very low expectations of the police in particular, I was amazed at how bad it was there and how nothing was really being done to tackle this either, because it's now an Afghan-led operation there, so it's an Afghan problem. And the Marines, the 500 infantry Marines have pulled back to the main base, which they almost never leave. They just spend their days lifting weights, watching DVDs. Just two very small teams of 18 Marines go out every few days to advise the Afghans.
Why isn't anyone else reporting on this, or why? Are they? I mean,
there's a few writers. There's a couple of writers
in England primarily, or
there's a couple of American writers I can think of. Matt Aikins, Luke Mogelson, who are brilliant, but very few apart from that, and mainstream media and TV in particular.
Why?
I mean, Afghanistan.
If it's like as bad as you say it is over there, why wouldn't evidence or reporting on the situation leak out more often?
It feels very important to me, so I think it should be front page news regularly.
But why do you think it isn't?
A lot of the reporters I spoke to after I did this film said, "Oh yeah, we knew about all this stuff," and I thought, well, why haven't you reported it then? And maybe they're worried that if they report it, then they won't get access to the military again. And certainly it's harmed my chances of getting access to the British military because they're very scared that I'll reveal the same thing in areas where they are.
So you've been in country with the British forces before. What year was that in?
2007.
And what was that? What did you report on then?
Same thing. I mean, the fighting was just much worse than we were being told. The Afghans were nowhere near ready. They were fighting for land and having to give it up that night because they didn't have the manpower.
Right.
And that's what first got me addicted. And after that, I started going to the US Marines. And I've got to say, the US Marines, they really respect freedom of the press and your right to go out there and report on it without restrictions. And I often found that because especially TV reporters, photographers are great, newspaper reporters tend to be great, TV reporters tend to go for a day or two and then leave. So if you're willing to go there, take the same risks as the Marines, spend weeks on end with them, sleeping where they sleep, eating what they eat, facing the same dangers they face, they really respect that, and they're just relieved that someone's finally turned up to show how rough it is for them.
So who gave you permission then to go and stay with the Marines?
The Marines themselves.
Right, so you petitioned them independently that I want to go and do this documentary.
Yeah.
Did you run into, or have you in your years in Afghanistan, run into other documentary filmmakers, independent ones?
Yeah, with the Marines, there's been a few.
Yeah.
And they all say the same thing. The US Marines are great to go out with.
Right.
And will let you film everything. A lot of other people, US Army, Navy, British forces, there's heavy restrictions. It's very difficult to get access to the real stuff that is going on.
Right. So a portion of this video ended up on the BBC a few months ago. When was that?
Early March.
And it was a shorter program, but what was the reaction to it in your country and in the UK, but also, the Marines that you did spend time with, did they see that piece over here?
Yeah, the officials were very unhappy with it and said you betrayed the trust of the Marines you were with.
Oh shit!
The officials,
the Americans.
Yeah. But the Marines themselves,
the people that gave you the permission, let's say, to go in.
Yeah.
So they were pissed off.
Yeah, the Marines themselves were happy that someone was just A, listening to them, and B, showing what they were dealing with.
So that kind of comes partly from how sympathetic they come off in the documentary, at least the long version that you've created for us. There's at least one Marine in there who's like incredibly persistent, and his name is
Major Bill Stuber.
Major Bill Stuber. And tell us what it was like finding him and how candid he was, and what were the kind of conversations like off camera.
I mean, I think he was very honest anyway, but they were sort of unlucky to get me, because I turned up and within the first day or two said, I've been to this place 3 or 4 times before, I've seen this and this happening. So they couldn't really bullshit me even if they wanted to.
Right.
But I don't think Major Stuber wanted to bullshit me. I mean, he's one of those people who just couldn't lie.
Right.
And also, he was all the stuff he was seeing, child abuse, murder, kidnapping, he was reporting up every day.
Right.
But nothing was being done.
Right. So
I think he was relieved just that someone was listening to him.
He
and
liked
taking
you
him
because
seriously.
you talked a lot on camera.
Yeah.
Do you think he got in trouble for talking?
I don't think so. I mean, the Marines seem to be allowed to have their own opinion more than elsewhere in the military. I mean, I think he's going to retire. I think this was really bad for him. So if he was a really career-minded Marine, maybe this would have done him a lot of damage. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly you look at the statements the generals are making, and they're very much on message.
Right.
They're saying all the right things.
Yes, explain that a little bit so people understand, like, someone like Stuber, what his kind of tour of duty in Afghanistan looks like, and how long he's in there. And then, there's this great sequence in your documentary where, American officials come to get briefed, and some British come to get briefed, and the briefing is like completely whitewashed, and Stuber is not allowed to speak at all, and not even asked. So maybe those two things, what is typical for an American soldier? What's their experience like over the last, let's just say the last 2 or 3 years, and not go back to the beginning of the war?
Yeah. The US Marines do more intense tours than US soldiers, US Army. So they tend to do 6-month tours, whereas the US Army tend to do 12-month tours.
Okay.
But in that 6 months, a month is taken from the handover, where you're in the main base, you're talking to the guy you're taking over from. So you've actually got 5 months in a location to try and sort things out. And in the book, I say, imagine taking an Indian who doesn't speak English and dropping him in the middle of Chicago and saying, by the way, your buddy killed some civilians by mistake before you got here. And within 5 months, you have to introduce an entirely new system of governance and work out who to trust and who not to trust. And you don't speak the language. How would they get on? I mean, they've got no chance whatsoever. And these are guys who are trained to fight.
Right.
They're not trained to be engineers, social workers, judges, policemen.
Right.
So it's an impossible task.
Right. And that scene where they come to get briefed. You described, I think maybe in conversations with me elsewhere, sort of like the lack of incentive that anyone has really to say anything. Can you explain, the level of kind of diligence in those briefings by the officials that walk in? Are they kind of there to be sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink, everything's okay, I'll go back to the Congress and say everything's good?
Yeah.
Or they genuinely believe that it's kind of okay, we can leave the country in 2014?
I always used to think that when you hear these incredibly upbeat statements, that they're just saying what they have to say, but they actually know what's really going on.
Right.
Having seen that briefing, now I'm not so sure, because the briefing was nothing but good news. I mean, 3 boys were shot dead. 3 boys who had been abducted and were being raped by police commanders had been shot dead. Wasn't mentioned at all. Right. So, I think it was a PR op, it was a photo op, and they wanted to go to Sangin, the most dangerous town in Afghanistan, and say there must be progress if the ambassadors can visit the once, their exact words were, the once insurgent stronghold of Sangin, as if we've somehow pushed the insurgents out, which we haven't. And that alone was enough to say there has been progress. So they didn't want to hear about all the bad things that were going on, or maybe it wasn't even them. It was someone below them didn't want to tell them about all the bad things that had been going, which is probably the more likely.
So from your point of view, then, and given your contact with different American troops and forces, is this like the example of a country that's basically has in fact written off this war and is really kind of done with it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you have to remember some of the statements that were made at the beginning of this war, about liberating women, sending little girls to school. The Taliban, are finished. I mean, now we would gladly do a peace deal with the Taliban, where they would be given seats in government. These are people who we were told, all about how they throw acid in girls' faces, ban music, and so on. We would gladly now do a peace deal with them. I mean, if that's, if George Bush would have said in 2001, after 11 or 12 years of fighting, perhaps 23,000 lives lost, maybe 90,000 people have lost, legs and arms,
yeah.
$600 billion spent. The best we can hope for is a peace deal with the Taliban. I mean, people would have thought he was insane, but that's the situation.
That's where we are
we're in
now.
Yeah. And everyone says the Afghan army have improved. They might be ready to take on the Taliban on their own. The Afghan army have improved, but half of the security forces are the police.
Yeah. So describe that to people, because I don't think they understand. What is the division and what is the readiness of each of those?
There's
forces?
roughly 200,000 Afghan army,
Right.
some of whom are almost capable of operating on their own. It depends who you believe. If you listen to the Pentagon, one battalion out of, I think it's 26, can operate independently. If you listen to other people, it's 5 or 6.
And what was your experience with the Afghan soldiers that you saw?
I mean, they were trying to do a good job. They were good guys, unlike the police. They weren't predatory like the police were. But as soon as they saw 4 suspected Taliban, who the Marines said to them were just men without weapons, but in the wrong area at the wrong time, they opened up with everything they had. Grenades, rockets, hundreds of bullets, and just spraying from the hip in all directions.
Not disciplined and
no. And if that's, and that was one of the best units I've ever seen, and the U.S. Marines there had ever seen.
right. So 200,000 soldiers, and then how many police?
150,000 police. And on the record, the people who train the police have said to me, most of the crime in southern Afghanistan is committed by the police.
Right.
I mean, they're hated and feared by the local population, and for good reason.
And how does that map to the rest of the country? What about in the rest of the country?
The police. I mean,
the police.
I took part in a debate in London recently where someone stood up and said, "Oh, you've just gone to Sangin. It's the worst town in Afghanistan. Other places have, there's been loads of progress elsewhere, and there has been progress in some other places." But then a Dutch soldier in the back stood up and said, "Well, I've been in the northeast for the last 6 years doing intelligence, supposedly the safe bit of Afghanistan, and the police are no different whatsoever there."
Really?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you were vindicated in the room by someone who's in the north.
Yeah.
So you've been going to Afghanistan for 6 years, right?
Yeah.
So describe to us, where you think we're at, or where the country is at, as we prepare to leave. Like, what's going to happen next?
Well, people keep on saying, they keep on talking about end game, and for us, the war is over.
Right.
I mean, almost all of our troops have pulled back to the main bases. For us, for the Afghans, it's entering possibly the worst stage so far. Everyone says, maybe there's going to be a civil war when we leave. There's already a civil war. There's 310 Afghan police and soldiers getting killed every month.
310.
Far worse losses than Britain and America ever suffered there. And civilian casualties keep rising on top of that as well. And this is why we're still there and can still bail the Afghans out with all the surveillance and air support that we've got. That's going to be gone.
So describe by your account, the Afghan police forces are kind of hopelessly corrupt or inept or both.
Yeah, both.
So who's attacking them? Who are they fighting? Like, what's the dynamic there? Is it just, really kind of hardened Taliban that are attacking them, or is the whole country kind of pitching in to fight these people? I mean, other warlords? Like, who's...
Yeah, this is the problem. Everyone...
if it is kind of proto-civil war, describe it.
Well, the problem is everyone, myself included, is kind of lazy in saying every member of the opposition is Taliban.
Right.
And that probably describes, 40 different groups. In the South, you certainly get the impression that a lot of the people are just...
To Americans, it's just Taliban,
yeah.
right? If you're not in an Afghan uniform, you're just...
And
you're not a farmer. you're Taliban.
Yeah, but most of the people we're fighting are farmers. They're just farmers who want us and the corrupt government out of their backyards.
Right.
You know, if are they being directed by Mullah Omar in Pakistan? I don't think so.
So so what does Taliban leadership look like in Afghanistan right now? Who's the leader, and where, are there directives and like?
Well, that's what I'm saying. There are 3 or 4 different groups based in Pakistan. They don't seem to be directing the guys that we're fighting against in southern Afghanistan.
So who we even potentially?
It's just a Pashtun nationalist insurgency, and
right. Okay.
Depending on how you do a deal with everyone at the same time,
So explain that. What's the Pashtun nationalist insurgency?
When we first finished bombing Afghanistan and the Taliban were bombed out of power, we were in quite a rush to get to Iraq. So we handed power to basically the Northern Alliance, the historical enemies of the Taliban. And to this day...
And they're Pashtun?
No. They're Hazaras, Tajiks, all the northern ethnic
all the
groups.
northern.
Taliban, not all Pashtuns are Taliban, but most Taliban are Pashtuns.
Right.
Karzai
is...
He's Pashtun. Yeah, that's why he was chosen, because uniquely he's a Pashtun who can also deal with everybody else.
He's a Pashtun who's not Taliban.
Yeah.
One of the few.
I mean, the problem is that officially the army has got something like 40% Pashtuns in it, but not southern Pashtuns.
Right.
So it's a conflict between the northern groups and the southern Pashtuns.
Okay.
And it's just a southern resistance against a corrupt... I mean, I film the Afghan army, who, but compared to the police, are the good guys.
Yeah.
Driving into a town with pictures of Masood and Dostum on their windshields.
Right.
The local people won't see that as their national army coming to save and protect them. They'll see it as their historical enemies coming for vengeance.
Right.
We could have created a national army and a national police force back in 2001, 2002, but showed no interest in it. I mean, George Bush said, I don't do nation building. Yeah.
So where does Karzai fit into all of this?
Well, he's from a very...
because, the reports over the last few years, at least over here, have been that he's probably stoned a lot and smoking pot, but definitely he's corrupt. And, just a few days ago, there was a report in the Times about him taking CIA money.
Bags of Iranian money. Yeah.
Bags of money.
Which he says go to pay for rehabilitation and pay off warlords and pay for scholarships for some of his men, which may well be true.
What does the country think of Karzai?
I mean, he doesn't seem to be as unpopular as you'd think. His family are spectacularly corrupt.
Right.
His brothers. I mean, one brother had the exclusive Toyota contract for importing Toyota. Wali Karzai in Kandahar was famously corrupt. But the headlines he's getting recently, where he's making statements about how he might join the Taliban or the Americans are in league with the Taliban, and I think to be a successful leader in Afghanistan with the ethnic divisions that exist, you have to not look like you're a foreign puppet.
Right.
So I think all of those statements are for his domestic audiences, and I think the American senior officials who deal with him realize that, which is why the statements he's making aren't having the bad effect you might think they would have.
But you've been there for a long time. Do you think Karzai has been, to the extent that he can, effectively rebuilding that country, or is there another...
How can Karzai do it? I mean, at the minute, they're supposed to be paying for half of their country's national budget, and they can't do it. That's not including the military, by the way. We're still paying the police and army salaries and equipment. Mm-hmm. So half of the expenditure, apart from the military, they can't do it.
But I presume that, well, I don't know, maybe tell me like I'm a stupid idiot, but I presume part of the job of him rebuilding the country is not just resources and training, but it's him projecting himself as the right leader and loved and accepted by all, and the kind of person that can give a fledgling army and a police force like some great role model and example to follow.
I mean,
does he even crisscross the country and go and speak to people, and like does he just sit in Kabul? Is he like completely protected? Is he like, you know?
Yeah, I mean the old joke that all the foreign reporters certainly make is that he's the mayor of Kabul and
So
nothing else. I've certainly never seen him in Kandahar or Helmand, but and in Kandahar and Helmand they don't necessarily talk about Karzai. They just talk about the government and the government being spectacularly corrupt. And everything you do, from being a young girl who goes to school to an officer who wants to graduate from training, needs a bribe.
Right.
And quite a large bribe a lot of the time. So it's more the government rather than Karzai who's criticised for that.
So, and Karzai reacted in the press to the original short form of this documentary that was on BBC.
Karzai's office said
office.
It was all lies. No one in the police force is involved in drug taking or kidnapping. And then I think someone whispered in his ear that actually it had all been filmed. So a team was sent to Sangin to investigate. But as far as I know, nothing's been done. And one of the deputy police commanders who says that awful line about, if my men don't have sex with these boys, who will they have sex with? Their own grandmothers, as if not having child boys would be a problem. We thought he'd been retired, which was their way of firing him. He'd actually been promoted and was working for the provincial police chief after I left.
So let's talk about this. Previous to this trip, had you encountered this phenomenon of, grown men keeping 14-year-old boys as sex slaves?
Yeah. Every trip I've heard stories about it. I've never seen it as blatantly as this. I've certainly never heard about boys being murdered for trying to escape.
And they call them chai boys because why?
Because they serve tea on the bases. They're sort of servants and sex slaves at the same time. And I honestly don't understand it in a country as religiously conservative as Afghanistan, how it's not accepted, but it's common.
But it's interesting because we were talking about this. There are, no girls around in public, so you're not, socializing with women.
Yeah.
And so it's essentially a country it's like a monastic existence.
And if you're a policeman from elsewhere in the country, and you might be sent to Helmand for 2 years without much leave, and so a few people have said to me things like, you can't obviously take your wife there, so you want some kind of companion. It's almost like ancient Rome,
right,
with the bearded men and the unbearded. But honestly, I wish I understood it more. You'd have thought it would be the most disgusting thing to even think of doing, and yet it's done fairly openly by a large number of police commanders in the south.
But some of these things, like the phenomenon of chai boys, this is endemic to Afghan culture, right? It's not a result of our war there.
No.
Right.
There was a poem by a famous Afghan king, an Afghan poet, where he says, he talks about the women of Kandahar being the most beautiful women in the world. But then on the other side of the river, he sees a boy with buttocks like peaches, and he ends the poem by saying, "But alas, I could not swim." It's been going on a while.
Otherwise, he would have got that.
Yeah. So it's been going on for a while. Then.
And the bribery, the corruption, the tribalism, like these are problems that the country has been dealing with for a long time.
Yeah, not. I mean, it doesn't. A lot of people now are kind of saying we tried our best, but the Afghans want it to be this way. And the Afghans want to fight each other, so it's their fault. That's definitely not true. After 2001, we chose to put those people back in power. The worst monsters from Afghanistan's recent history. That didn't have to be the way it went at all. And there certainly was a sense straight after the bombing of the Taliban and the Taliban left power that everyone within reason was willing to play their part to try and rebuild their country.
And what was the fatal error then?
Well, because in the rush to get to Iraq, we handed power to whoever happened to have enough men to provide some kind of security, no matter what kind of crimes they'd committed in the past, no matter how much blood they had on their hands.
Right. And
I think at that moment we persuaded a lot of Afghans, that's all you're going to do for us. If you're going to bring Dostum, for example, back into power, one of the worst warlords from Afghanistan's history, then we'll fight you. It didn't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think, how precipitous will this be? Like, the U.S. leaves in next year, but do they pull back completely, or what will this time? What do you think the transition is going to look like?
Well, there's always going to be. They're talking about 10,000, 12,000 troops will remain in country. that means roughly 2,000-3,000 who can actually go out and do things, because the others will be in support of those troops. And there'll be a lot of special forces there, targeting suspected Al-Qaeda and being close to Pakistan. So in terms of it being a counter-terror campaign, that's going to carry on for a very long time. In terms of it being counterinsurgency and nation building, that's over. We've absolutely stopped even talking about doing that anymore.
Right. And just what do what's your prediction on the way that the coalition of Afghans that are fighting or resisting these particular police forces? What do you think that dynamic is like? In the documentary, you talked about like how it's the supply lines have steadily been eroded, and so that a lot of these police bases don't have gasoline and are poorly equipped, don't even know how to maintain the generators that they have there, or the other equipment. Like how quickly does this sort of shitty network that we helped set up of police bases, how quickly does that kind of dissolve and melt away? I mean,
Afghans I know from that area who know far better than me think they'll vanish straight away. And they'll either join the Taliban or just disappear back to wherever they came from. And the big weakness for them is logistics. Logistically, they're just totally unsustainable.
Right.
In every way.
Right. You talked to some people. I think it was Stuber again, who was talking about the gas theft in the country.
Yeah, the police in southern Helmand. The police in Helmand were stealing fuel from Lashkar, the provincial capital,
right.
And it was thought to be roughly $1 million worth of fuel. So the spigot was just turned off. And of course, when 20 officers wanted to go to the provincial capital for training, the Marines had to lend them some of their fuel to bail them out. And that's gonna stop happening very soon.
I mean, if there is no gas now, it's not going to get any better once the Americans leave.
I'm really pessimistic, and I don't see the police lasting, weeks after we actually leave.
One thing that's really hard for me, maybe other people in this country, is to kind of wrap our brains around the Afghan economy. Like, what is the state of the Afghan economy, and of course, where does drug money fit into this, and what are these people growing? It doesn't look like incredibly versatile, sort of farmland.
I mean, I've only really travelled extensively in the south, so all I can talk about is the south, and Helmand and Candor. Helmand in particular are, the produce more drugs than any other province in Afghanistan. Helmand in particular. And every single house you go into in Helmand, there's a stack of harvested opium poppies above your head. And it's sort of funny to see British or American troops walking in and not even mentioning it. Don't even make a nod to it. It's just so normal.
Right.
So the economy in the south is heavily dependent on opium, and the
opium
production.
The only thing they're really growing.
It's the only thing you can. I mean, you can grow other things, but it's harder. The price isn't as good, and the Taliban have often made loans to farmers based on next year's crop. So they've established exactly the kind of long-term relationships that we've always tried to establish.
That's not good, right? In a country, it's not that big. Can they identify with detail who the drug lords are? Do they know these people? Is it like common knowledge, basically, that the government Kabul kind of knows everyone who's responsible for
it is half the government. I mean, half the cabinet. Everyone says are involved. I mean, and you just go into any provincial capital and you see they call it narco-texture or narco palaces.
Right.
These huge villas, with marble and mirrors that just you can imagine how much they stand out. And everyone knows it's not a secret.
And the Americans know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Was that another decision that was just made? We can't affect the drug trade in this country, so don't even bother? Or?
I mean, eradication efforts have gone on elsewhere. I haven't seen any.
Initially, there were eradication efforts, right?
And there were people calling for the whole crop to be sprayed.
They were burning, and they were spraying things. And
but in the south, I haven't seen any serious effort. And when you did come across teams that were doing it, you always heard stories about, take out those 2 little fields there, but don't touch those big fields over there,
right,
because they belong to somebody we know. But the opium production's gone up every year since we've been there. I think there was one year when it went down because there was a mystery bug, which really was a mystery bug. It wasn't some CIA,
like a pest.
Yeah. But apart from that,
the
opium production's gone up every year that we've been there.
Why do you think that the drug lords are tolerated?
Oh, because if we really if we really took away the only source of income for hundreds of thousands of poor Afghan families, I think you'd turn an insurgency into an insurrection. And at the minute, a lot of people are kind of sitting on the fence, because if they're nice to the US Marines during the day, they might get a new well built for them or something, and then they're nice to the Taliban at night because the Taliban aren't going anywhere and they're probably afraid of them. So they're kind of sitting on the fence. If we took away their main source of income, and for a lot of people their only source of income, then we'd really be in trouble there.
So yeah, I mean, like, you've been going for 6 years. These people, adult male Afghanis, have been experiencing some kind of form of fighting or kind of virtual occupation for their whole lives. What's your experience? How many regular non-Taliban farmer type Afghanis did you actually get to talk to in the course of your trips over there, and what are they like? What are these people like, these dudes?
I mean, dozens, a lot more than is thought possible when you're on embeds, and they all had pretty much the same sentiment, which was like, I don't really care who's in power. I just want security and justice. Just leave me alone to farm my bit of land, and I won't bother anybody. And I won't expect anything from anybody either. The idea that they expect central government to provide them with all these services is completely foreign to them. I made a point, when I went into a town that had been under Taliban control, I'd always make a point of interviewing as many locals as possible and saying, look, what was it like? We hear so many stories about life under the Taliban, and they'd say, it wasn't so bad. There was no theft, there was no robbery, there were no checkpoints where they took money from us. The problem is we've demonized the Taliban so much.
Well, we've misconstrued them because we have sort of put the term. We've made it so broad, we've broadened it out that it's kind of meaningless.
But at the same time we've done that, we've sort of glorified our allies. And on the issue of women's rights, for example, the Taliban and Northern Alliance, they've got no ideological difference in terms of women's rights, none whatsoever.
Right.
So it's I think it's one of the big mistakes of this war has been to demonize your enemy and glorify your allies, where actually a lot of areas there's very little difference, if any.
Sharia and Islam, how powerful is it really with the general Afghani population? Because that's like one barometer that's going to tell us how successful a new rise of the Taliban will be. How pious is this country?
I mean, very.
On one side, by the way, they're bribing, kidnapping people, and having sex with young boys, but how religious is the country? I
mean, it seems to be a mix of religious and cultural influences, but very, very conservative. To the point where the ideas that we thought we could introduce, we assumed everybody wanted the things we were looking to introduce back at the beginning. And I don't think a lot of the population did want them introduced. I mean, don't forget that Karzai himself signed in a law that said rape within marriage is legal, women and men can't mix at school or work, women can't leave the house without their husband's permission. And like I said before, the idea that the Taliban and our allies in Afghanistan somehow disagree on women's rights, for example, is a fallacy.
Paint a picture to us a little bit about what information or media looks like in Afghanistan. I mean, are they watching a particular news program at night, or are they watching anything? Or?
Yeah, very, I mean, again, all I really know is Helmand and the more rural areas of Kandahar. And I've read a few American commentators say, it's fantastic. There are TVs here and cell phones, and there are cell phones. I haven't seen TVs anywhere where I've been.
Yeah. What's it like being there? Like, does it feel like going back in time, or?
Yeah.
Do you lose contact, connection with the outside world?
Yeah, no contact with the outside world for the 5 or 6 weeks I'm there. I mean, when you're in the villages outside of the main towns in Helmand province, it's pretty much mud huts with high walls around them, no access to running water, electricity. I mean, certainly, very little communications, internet, anything like that. I mean, the people have nothing, really nothing. Large families will live in a 2-3 bedroom house, which is literally 2 or 3 rooms, and how they survive some of the cold nights, I don't know. Because I'm there in my Gore-Tex and my thermal underwear and sleeping bag and all that, and freezing. So how they survive the cold nights, I don't know.
You know, what have you seen in terms of, you know, just like Afghan social life, like inter-village or, you know, in these rural areas? It sounds pretty depressing and bleak. The guys and the farmers in your video are, I mean, they're like, they have this amazing, you know, look to them, but it's, you know, it's character based on, you know, having been beaten down for so many years. And
I mean, it does sound very bleak and depressing, but most of the time when you enter someone's home or village, they're unbelievably welcoming and generous. I mean, they've literally got almost nothing, and they're giving you, you know, one of their last pieces of bread, and rushing someone out to get tea for you, a little bowl of sweets.
right.
Some of the nicest, friendliest, most you know, welcoming people I've ever met anywhere. Which is often true. It seems like the worse the country's reputation is, the nicer the people tend to be. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you know, everyone seems to know someone that's stepped on an IED or been killed by whoever. And you know, they do have nothing, but they go to the bazaar every day. They seem to.
What's the bazaar like?
In Sangin, the bazaar has supposedly been transformed from, you know, how it was in 2006 when we first went in, and there's the tarmac road there now, but the bazaar was thriving before we went in, because that was the main opium bazaar. I mean, almost for Helmand, most of the opium was traded there, so it was thriving before we went in.
So what, do you just like have, how do they trade at the bazaar? Just like tons of poppy?
Like three walls, corrugated metal shutter on the front, and then sell whatever. It used to be opium, now it's car parts, food, quite a lot of imported food, blankets and things from Pakistan, but you know, it didn't look transformed at all when I went there. I mean, I was looking forward to seeing it because I'd heard all these statements about how much it had been transformed, and apart from these two stretches of tarmac through the main bazaar, I didn't notice any difference at all, and there are still loads of buildings that have had bombs dropped in them that haven't been rebuilt. And actually I interviewed a mullah on a previous trip, and he said to the Marine, he said, "You've killed 5,000 people here." And I've got no idea if that's true or not, 5,000 people. And you've built a 3-kilometre tarmac road. You know, which do you think is better for us? No road and no 5,000 people killed, or the road and 5,000 people killed? You know, I think he speaks for a lot of people. I mean, on the recent trip, I spent some time with the local council, and the British were very proud of the local council. You know, it was 2,000 people from Sangin had voted for these guys, and they didn't have a single good word to say about any of us.
Right.
They said, "You've created a few kings and businessmen, but the poor people haven't received a penny. There is no security. We can't stand up on our own after you leave. We have nothing." Showed me a picture of 4 guys who had been killed, and no one was supporting their families. And this was a 3-4 hour long meeting, and not a single good word to say.
Not a good omen. What about drone warfare? Is that a big problem in these villages? Has it radicalized?
No, there aren't many drone strikes at all in Helmand. I mean, you see them. They're there in Helmand and Kandahar. They're mostly used for surveillance.
So describe how the Americans or NATO is operating then currently, how they're collecting information.
Well, there's the cameras they've got. There's cameras everywhere. I mean,
how do they do that?
There are like hydrogen balloons that float all over Helmand and Kandahar constantly, and they've got thermal cameras, night vision cameras that can film everything on the ground. So you can track a guy for a week using these cameras. There are huge masts with cameras. There are drones with cameras. So it's mostly done through surveillance. The bulk of the fighting force, the infantry, have pulled back and never go out. You know, it really is Afghan-led now, and that was always the claim in the past, was that it was Afghan-led, and it was never Afghan-led. You know, Americans or Brits would drag along a few Afghans reluctantly. Now the Afghans really are on their own, and the US or British infantry are just there in case things go catastrophically wrong over the next 12 months. Apart from that, the war's over for them.
And do you foresee, the insurgents, whether they're official Taliban or not, do you see them biding their time over the next 12 months, waiting for everyone to leave, or are they operating, I mean, again,
everyone keeps on saying that, the Taliban's momentum has been reversed in Helmand, and I mean, in Sangin every night you'd hear fights going on all around you, IEDs going off all around you. Last week was the deadliest day for NATO forces of the year so far. They're still as active as they've ever been, maybe more active than they've ever been. It's just that now they're just killing Afghans.
Right.
not British or American, so we're not hearing about it.
Right. So it seems like right.
According to there's one group who give advice to all of the NGOs worldwide about safety. According to them, I think it's 47%. There's an increase in Taliban attacks by 47% so far this year.
So it's getting worse. It's not being really reported because it's Afghans.
Yeah.
Karzai has no real response to it in the country, and no one has a TV, so they're not really sharing this information.
There are far more casualties now than there have been during the worst years for British and American forces. It's just that they're all Afghan, so we're not hearing about it.
So besides us, who else is in Afghanistan or rumored to be? And what do you know about any other governments?
Well, this is the big problem in Afghanistan is you look at where it is, the crossroads. I mean, it's Pakistan, of course, is heavily involved. India is heavily involved, supporting the Northern Alliance, which makes Pakistan more paranoid that India is surrounding it. Iran obviously is involved, the Stans in the north of the country. China has invested heavily in Afghanistan. A lot of people are saying, that's the next major chapter is China's involvement.
Describe that.
To be honest, I don't know much about it. I just know that people think there are billions of dollars worth of mineral wealth in Afghanistan, and that the Chinese are making moves to start trying to extract it. And like the Chinese in Africa, that might be a purely commercial venture without any military intervention. People think there are billions of dollars worth of minerals just under the ground in various parts of Afghanistan, and that because of that, like with Africa, the Chinese are going to be heavily involved.
But but not supporting the Taliban. So, which begs the question: in like a country of such limited resources, how do these Taliban survive? How are they funded? Where do they get their IEDs from, or their weaponry, or even their ammunition? Like, where is it coming from? We're watching Israel bomb Syria because it's very clear that Syria is a transit route for arming Hezbollah.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah. Well, Pakistan has got an interest in maintaining influence with the Taliban. The Taliban are making money from opium, and someone like China. I mean, we do it now. If we're trying to secure convoys going in and out of Afghanistan, we'll pay warlords and militias along the way, some of whom are undoubtedly Taliban.
Right.
So if you're willing to pay off whoever it is to get from A to B, then that person can make a lot of money. And we're already paying the Taliban to do that, so I'm sure China, whoever, will be paying them a lot of money to do the same thing before too long.
So the title of this piece is, "This is what winning looks like." That's a quote, right?
Yeah, that's the quote from General Allen on his last day as commander of NATO forces in Afghanistan.
And he was basically trying to describe a situation.
He said the future, our legacy is Afghan forces pushing back the Taliban, spreading the influence of the Afghan government. This is winning. This is what victory looks like, and we shouldn't shrink from using those words. And I think that's almost the exact opposite of what our legacy will be in Afghanistan.
Do you think he'll go back soon?
He'll go back.
Will you go back?
Oh, will I go back? Sorry. I really want to go back. I mean, my great fear is that what happens next won't be covered at all, because even with British and American troops still there and still dying, the public at home seem not to care anymore. When all the British and American troops are actually home, or most of them, there are going to be some staying. This could not appear anywhere in the newspapers at all.
Would you go back knowing what you know now about the state of the Afghan military and the police force? Would you go back under their protection?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the gunfights I witnessed between the police and the army and the Taliban sounded awful, and there were hundreds of bullets and rockets and grenades, but very few, if any, casualties.
Right.
So I think unless I was unlucky enough to be on a small patrol base that came under a major attack by the Taliban, and that has happened where everybody on the base has been killed, I think you could cover it and be safer than you'd think. I mean, not safe, but not it wouldn't be suicidal.
Right. And you would go in embedded with the police forces?
Yeah, I mean, a few people have said to me, don't do that with the police force, because my film was shown in Afghanistan, and they even went to the police commander and said, a BBC journalist filmed you talking about young boys getting abused. He denied it was him, and someone had it on his laptop and showed him, and even when he saw his own picture, he said, that's not me. So they've said maybe don't do some stuff with the police because you might get shot. But yeah, I mean, I was in contact today with a commander of the Afghan army that I know very well, and I said, look, next time there's a big operation, I'd love to come.
And when you go to Afghanistan, how do you communicate? Like, do you have a translator with you, or?
Yeah, well, I usually borrow the military. I mean, there's loads of translators around, or you never get accurate translations anyway. So I just film everything, and then when I get back, I get it accurately translated, and that's when you find out what's really being said, and it's normally completely different and far worse than what you thought was being said.
Wow. So you're kind of directing out of intuition sometimes.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I can, I know some words, so I can just about understand roughly what's going on.
Right. What's the book about? You have a new book.
Yeah, I mean, I just, like we were talking about before, I've been out on major operations for the last 6 or 7 years in Afghanistan, and what I saw with my own eyes and filmed with my own camera was so different to what we were being told was happening in Afghanistan. I just thought I have to get this all down on paper in one place. And I've heard authors in the past say, I had to write this book, like I had to write this novel, and I thought that was just pretentious nonsense. But I just thought I have to get all this down in one place so that someone somewhere can see a portrait of what the war actually looks like, and what it's doing to Afghans as well, because that seems to get lost completely as well.
So it's not being covered properly in Western media. Is there anyone in the media that's actually doing a disservice, covering Afghan in a way that you feel is like completely irresponsible because they're not going deep enough, or they're deliberately omitting?
I think a lot of people are just visiting the big forward operating bases, and they're filming training, and they're getting statements from generals saying we're making progress and things are going well. And a lot of reporters who I used to sort of follow and respect have said, oh, you notice that security feels much better in Helmand. Thinking, just go 500 meters out of that base, and just stay one night and listen to what goes on outside the base, and you'll know that isn't true. But there are some who are doing a fantastic job. I mean, Matt Aikins and Luke Mogelson are the two that have really stood out. And there's an organisation called the Afghan Analyst Network, who do an amazing job, but really in-depth studies of what's going on with people in country who speak the language, but no one outside the really committed Afghan followers is really reading their stuff, as far as I can see.
And what about, just one last thing maybe, are there any public figures, Afghan public figures, that you think have some, hold some hope for the future? Are there any kind of leaders outside of the disgraced politicians that are in there now that, have at least, gained some kind of respect or mythology amongst the
there are
locals?
a couple of people who ran in the last elections, Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah, who seemed like they would have been great for the country.
One was a doctor, no?
Yeah.
Abdullah.
Worked for, one worked for the World Bank.
Right.
A very highly qualified academic. And I think they would have been great for the country, but they got tiny percentages from they're not really that well known outside of the major cities. And this, the elections 2014 could be the thing that makes everything fall apart.
So you're planning to go back maybe in 2014?
Yeah.
Or later this year?
Yeah, no, I want to go back several times.
If we send you?
Yeah, someone will send me.
Okay.
But yeah, I definitely want to go back. And the elections could really be the turning point. I mean, if there's massive fraud, which there has been in the past, or if a non-Pashtun wins or doesn't win but is given the result, then that could be the tipping point.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Nice talking to you. See you soon.